The following podcast is taken from a live broadcast on Inspire FM.
Any health advice given, whether general, diet, physical, or spiritual, is general only and must be verified by your doctor. If you need medical advice, please consult a doctor.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the latest edition of the Health and Fitness Show. I am your host Suleiman Rafiq, and today's show is all around sugar and sugar addiction. Today's show has been pre-recorded, so you can sit back, relax and enjoy the latest educating edition of the Health and Fitness Show. Recent research has shown that on average we are having double the recommended levels of sugar, and record numbers of children are having teeth removed due to tooth decay, and we know in Luton that is a particular issue. Now, some say that sugar is evil and some say it is necessary for energy. So let's now separate fact from fiction and speak to a nutritionist at Action on Sugar, Holly Gabriel. Holly, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Could you just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your organisation?
Yeah, of course. So, as you said, I'm a nutritionist. I work for Action on Sugar, and we're a campaigning charity. So what we try and do is work with government and industry to improve the food environment that we live in, to make it easier for us to live a healthy life and make that easy for us in a positive way. So one of the main things that we work on is to try and encourage industry and manufacturers to reformulate the products that they sell to us to make them healthier for us. So bringing the sugar down, the salt down, the fat down, and things like that. And also working on areas like trying to get labelling better, and restrictions on promotions of unhealthy foods, and that kind of thing.
Fantastic. Now, sugar is quite a complex topic, and as I said in the intro, there's kind of lots of myths and facts around what sugar actually is and natural sugars, etc. Can you just very simply kind of just take us through what we mean when we talk about sugar?
Yeah, so it is really complicated and it can get very confusing. So it's the most simplest way of looking at it is that there's sort of two main types that you've got to think about in your diet. So we've got the sugars, the natural sugars that are contained within food, so within fruit and vegetables and milk and other foods, because ultimately all foods are converted into sugar in the body. So that's how we get our energy. So that type of sugar. And there's also what we call free sugars, which are the sugars that we need to try and limit in our diet, and they've been removed from their natural sources. So you're talking about sort of table sugars that come from sugar beets and things like that, and also fruit sugars and syrups and honeys and all that kind of thing, and things that have been added to food. And those are the ones that we're having too much of, and those are the ones that we need to try and limit as much as possible.
Sure. And can you just take us through in relation to what are the benefits of having less sugar, both free and, as you said, natural?
I think, it's limiting the amount of reducing the amount of free sugars that you have in your diet. As you mentioned earlier, tooth decay is a really big problem, and sugar is really not very good for our teeth at all. That's where the strongest evidence is around limiting sugar, and it's a huge problem, as you say as well, with children having teeth extracted. So it's definitely going to have massive benefits with regards to your dental health. It also increases the amount of calories that we're consuming, which can lead to weight gain, which can lead to a number of different health conditions, such as type 2 diabetes and some cancers. But it's also very easy to overconsume sugar, especially with sugary drinks. And sugary drinks specifically have been linked to an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
Sure. And so sugary drinks, often we think of fizzy drinks, kind of common fizzy drinks. Is that what your research has shown, that people are drinking too much of those, or is it other drinks, or what kind of drinks are these sugars found in?
Well, definitely fizzy soft drinks and energy drinks.
Energy drinks, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, for not just the sugar, but the caffeine as well. And that's another area that we're campaigning on, to try and ban the sales of those to children, because they're just not suitable for those that are younger.
And when you say children, what are you looking at there in relation to what are you campaigning for? Is it under 18s or under 16s?
Yeah, Under 18.
Under
Yeah.
18, yeah. Because you see so many children, like young people now, college kids and stuff with these energy drinks. Seems to be a growing problem.
Yeah, definitely, and with younger children as well. And it seems to be quite a trendy thing to have. There's a lot of evidence to say that they really affect children's concentration in class.
In a bad way or a good way? Because that's part of the purpose is they're making you more. They kind of sell it that they're making you more alert. So, can you just break that down for us?
Yeah, probably in a negative way, in the sense of making unstable energy levels,
Right,
highs
unstable.
and lows,
Yeah.
Can make you irritable, and often they're being consumed instead of food, especially in the morning, and high levels of caffeine are just not good for us.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, with regards to drinks, so yeah, fizzy drinks, energy drinks, but also you need to be careful about consuming too much fruit juice and juice-based drinks, and also milk-based drinks, so milkshakes. And that's an area that we're working on to try and because I know you wanted to perhaps talk a little bit about the sugar tax, the sugar levy, but that's one of the areas that are included in that. And we've seen in some of our surveys that milkshakes, milk-based drinks, seen by some as being as a slightly healthier alternative because they contain milk.
Yes.
But from our survey we did last year as part of Sugar Awareness Week, highlighted some of them that had nearly 160 grams of sugar in one portion.
160 grams of sugar in one milkshake.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that would be the freak shakes. Is that one of those ones?
Exactly,
the freak shake, yeah. So this is like often at dessert parlors and stuff. They have these milkshakes that have kind of additional kind of products on. Is that what we're referring to?
Yeah. So milkshakes and ice cream and full cakes sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
And these often are sold in places where you go out to eat, which don't have clear labelling. You've got no idea what's in it, and obviously I think everyone can make the assumption themselves that there's quite a lot of sugar in those products, but it's really important. We feel that those places have ingredients lists and also nutrition information, so you can see what you're buying, so you can make an informed choice.
Absolutely, and because especially with summer's not far away, and the kind of particularly in the town centre, we've got so many different places that sell milkshakes, and perhaps people don't necessarily realise, because it's being consumed so quickly, just how much sugar is in some of these products. And it's really interesting. Over 100 grams of sugar in some of these products is quite a statistic.
Yeah, and 156 was the highest.
156, yeah, that is quite something. And one of the things, Holly, I just want to move on to is in relation to, as I say, one of the reasons I was keen to do this show is just because I hear so much about people talking about sugar and, I've cut out sugar and it's done this for me, or, did you know X, Y, Z in relation to sugar? One of the kind of things a lot of people say is actually fruit has a lot of sugar in, and so you shouldn't eat certain fruits. So like you shouldn't have bananas because it's got a lot of sugar in. What's your organization's kind of take on people saying that?
I just feel sorry for bananas. They get a lot of things.
Well, let's go for dates. Yeah.
Well, dates are slightly different again, yeah, so that's a good point actually. So sugar that's contained within fruit is absolutely fine to eat. I mean, that fruit tastes inherently sweet. There's a lot of sugar in them. But as we talked about earlier, they're contained within the fruit, and they contain loads of other benefits for us. So fibre, fruit, vitamins and minerals. And nobody in the UK is eating enough fruit or vegetables specifically as well. So, although we wouldn't recommend eating 15, 20 bananas, eating fruit in that way is good for us, and it's something we should all be doing more of. When you're talking about things like dates or like sort of dried fruit, those are the ones that they're very concentrated in sugar. So your portion size should be a lot smaller, and you should try and eat those as part of a meal, because they do get stuck in your teeth, and they have the kind of same effect on your dental health as perhaps eating sweets. So
Really?
as much as they do have a lot of fibre, because
Mm.
the water's been removed from dried fruit, they're much more concentrated and the sugar's much more concentrated. So they're not good for your teeth. So that's something to watch with children because it's often seen as, a healthy
Yeah.
snack, raisins, dates, that kind of thing.
Yeah, raisins was the
and
other one, isn't it? It's often
Yeah.
given to children. So just to clarify that then, so then dates, raisins, those kind of things should be as part of a meal. Was that what you were saying?
Yeah, so like either end of a meal, so you're not snacking in between meals.
Oh,
and
okay,
not
so it
that
shouldn't
high
be as a snack.
concentrated
Right,
sugar
I'm
thing.
with you now.
Yeah. So you need to leave a little bit of gap for your teeth, because if you're having sugary drinks and eating between meals with sweet things such as dried fruit and things like that, your mouth is getting this constant wash of sugar over your teeth, and that's the thing that's going to cause tooth decay.
Sure. And then in relation to staying on the topic of fruit, the other thing that often comes up is about fruit juices and smoothies. So what can you just clarify what the kind of recommendation is around fruit juices and or smoothies?
So fruit juice and smoothies, the recommended amount is to have no more than 150 mils a day, which is quite a very small.
I was gonna say, I think
Very small.
that's like a baby. It's one of those little baby ones, isn't it? Even if
It's very difficult because guidelines say that 150 mils counts towards one of your 5 a day, because it still contains a lot of the vitamins and minerals and benefits that you have. But if we talk about orange juice specifically, to get 150 mils of juice, which is again a very small amount, you probably need to juice about 3 or 4 oranges.
Oh, really?
So if you think about comparing things to drinking, you wouldn't probably eat 4 oranges in one go, but it's very easy to consume all the sugar that's contained in those by drinking juice. And often these juices are sold in, especially smoothies, are sold in really large containers, 500, 600 mils.
Yeah.
And it's not clear, and it's not very honest to even when manufacturers put on pack one serving is 1/4 of this bottle, because in reality, you buy a drink grab a drink to go with your lunch meal deal. You're not going to drink a little bit of it and then put it away for the next day, are you? So
No.
it's not quite. That's something that needs to be worked on.
Sure, but I guess part of the difficulty with that, if I was playing devil's advocate, is that often, so take the orange as the example. So often, if you're on the go, it's quite messy to kind of peel an orange and all the rest of it, and it ends up going on your shirt, etc., etc. And so perhaps the logic some people make in their minds is, well, I'll grab a bottle of orange juice, and then at least I'm getting my kind of vitamin C and all the rest of it like that. So what would you say in relation to if it was about not having the juice or having the juice?
Yeah,
but quite a large amount.
Yeah, I think it's very dependent on what, like you say, what your personal situation is and what your overall diet is. I mean, all food can be enjoyed as part of a balanced diet. And if you're not having any fruit, you don't particularly like it, and you never eat any fruit, or you say it's a straight choice between a small portion of juice or a fizzy drink or no fruit at all, then it's the better. It's the better choice overall. And then you've got to think about what you're having over the entire day, and not just in isolation. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having juice, but there's things you can do where you can dilute it with water to get to reduce some of that sugar, and also just think about what you're having over the entire day with regards to your sugar content.
Sure.
But no, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having juice occasionally, definitely not.
And just in relation to, I mean, there's a growing increase in kind of sugar-free products. So you kind of see it everywhere, or you see it in lots of places now, sugar-free this, sugar-free that. But often what they're replacing the sugar with is sweeteners. And so I've heard, again, this is another one of those, is it a myth or is it a fact? In relation to, people often say, well, actually sweeteners are worse for you, for your health, than sugar is. And so what's your organisation's kind of position on that?
I think again, it's another complicated area, and there are lots of sweeteners. There are hundreds of them. Some of them have been around for a really long time and have really strong evidence to say that they're safe to use. some of them are a bit newer, and perhaps in the future there'll be evidence to say that perhaps some of them aren't as good for us. We just don't know that yet.
Right.
But from a point of view from reducing sugar, especially when we're formulating products, they are a better choice for certain people in certain circumstances. So if you're drinking a lot of sugary drinks, fizzy drinks, having something with a sweetener that has much less sugar in it, no sugar at all, is a better choice. And with regards, they are a really useful tool to reformulating products for manufacturers to take some of that sugar out. Ultimately, we think that the sweetness of food should be reduced because everything's just overly sweet, that we need to start getting used to having flavours that are a little bit less sweet. And obviously, if you put sweetener in it, it can sometimes be more sweet, which isn't kind of weaning you off really sweet taste. But in some circumstances, they're a really useful tool. And ultimately, it is down, again, to your kind of personal view of your own diet and your diet as a whole and what it is you're trying to achieve. If you're drinking litres and litres of full sugar soft drinks every day, having one that's sweetened with a sweetener is a much better option for you.
Absolutely, because that's another point that's often made is around the fact that it kind of keeps you, and as we said at the outset, this concept of sugar addiction, it kind of having products with sweeteners in kind of keeps you hooked to the sweetness of food and drinks rather than reducing that desire to have everything that's as sweet as some people like it to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think if we're still continuing to eat and drink foods that are really, really sweet, then we're not kind of really getting to the not sort of challenging the idea that we're just eating too much sugar and too much sweet things. So we need to try and kind of limit that.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly, like you say, if people's plan is to try and reduce the amount of sugar that they want to have in their diet in the longer term, then sweeteners is something that, as you say, kind of you need to just kind of understand a little bit around how that kind of plays with your psyche, I guess. How much sugar can a person have a day?
So when we're talking about the types of sugar that we need to consider the added sugars, so if you're over 11 years old, anything up to an adult, it's recommended that you have a maximum of up to 30 grams a day, which is about 7 teaspoons or 7 cubes. For a 7 to 10-year-old, it's 24 grams or 6 cubes or 6 teaspoons, and for 4 to 6-year-olds, about 5 cubes or 19 grams. But you can see how that's quite challenging, especially if you're talking about sugary drinks. A can of cola is 35 grams of sugar. So regardless of anything else you drank that day, you're still way over what the recommendation is. So you can see that's how we feel there's a massive imbalance here about what we think is healthy and what the food and drink industry are giving us.
Yeah, absolutely.
doesn't quite match up.
No, and it kind of relates to the point. There's lots of foods out there that people don't necessarily realize there's sugar in, because you said earlier, didn't you, that there's sugar in everything? Is that right?
Well, there's certainly sugar in a lot of things, from breads to yogurt, soup, savoury foods. It's a challenge to actually calculate how much you're having on a day-to-day basis, and labelling isn't as clear as it should be with regards to sugar content, and that's something that needs to be improved to help us make better choices.
I guess it's from a listener's perspective, it's understanding around that 7 teaspoons. Is that right for adults? 7 teaspoons? Yeah, so that's 7 teaspoons. We're probably having a lot of that without having any additional, what we would maybe think of as sugary products.
Yeah.
So is there any statistics on like how much people are actually having on average?
Well, national diet surveys show that we're eating about double what we should be. So looking at that over double, it's probably around the 60 gram mark. But there's probably a lot of us are eating much more than that, and also these surveys are self-reported. So we do know as well that they're often not quite as accurate as they should be, because if you're trying to report on what your own behaviour is, and it's something that perhaps something you shouldn't be eating so much of, then you're likely to say that you have a little bit less of it. And if you look at some of the would go back to the the horrible milkshake. But the amount of people that are eating those products, once or twice a week, or even more than that, and then that's obviously they're going to be consuming far more than double the recommendation of 60 a day.
Absolutely. And a lot of these like products are kind of targeted at children, which is something that we're going to come on to later, because it's a real concern for us here in Luton around the number of children who are suffering from tooth decay and way above the national average, and the number of children who are having teeth removed under general anaesthetic as well. Is quite scary. So we are going to come on to talk more about that shortly. Often when we talk about subjects like this, people will feedback saying, this is all well and good, but it kind of feels as though there's nothing left to eat. So in a kind of practical way, how can we reduce sugar? How can we eat less sugar?
I think it's about being a little bit savvy with labels and having a little bit of a shop around with regards to products, because our surveys show a huge variation in the sugar content in very similar products. Right. And that's something that we want to try and get in line. So, you can walk into one shop and buy an apple pie and it have X amount of sugar in, and you go into another shop or supermarket and buy a pretty much similar product and can have twice as much in it. And you could make an assumption as a consumer that a similar product will have a similar amount. So things like that were brought into line. So it's about kind of having a look at those labels and looking at the sugar content, looking at the traffic light label, seeing what the sugar content is. And also, again, looking at what you're having in your diet and where your sugar is coming from. So if you're a fan of sugary drinks, or you're a sugary cereal fan, or whether you like a sweetened yogurt, it's all about thinking of what area can you make the most benefit and most reduction from, and taking that sugar out gradually, so you're not too much of a shock to the system. So just cutting down gradually by the change in the product, or switching it up, cutting it down. If you have sugar in your tea, that's a really easy one to just cut down slowly.
A lot of people talk about that one, don't they?
Changes.
Yeah, a lot of people say, I've cut down the sugar in my tea. But often, people will have then like an extra biscuit. It's like, I'm doing a great job. Yeah, absolutely. Not necessarily realizing, like in some of the savory things that people have with tea, that there's quite a lot of sugar in some of these products as well, because it's less obvious, I guess. And then just in relation to, you mentioned kind of table sugars. Is that something that people are kind of using less of in your experience, or is that something that's still quite prominent in relation to the amount of sugar that people are eating in the surveys and stuff?
I think it would be very interesting to do some research around that, because it's certainly, I think there's definitely been a shift in behaviour over the past sort of 5-10 years in regards to sugar content, because you don't, this isn't based on actual evidence, this is my kind of thoughts about things, but
that's fine.
You don't necessarily see so much people, adding a lot of sugar to tea and on cereal and things like that anymore. I don't know, maybe people are, but there's certainly been a bit of a shift in that respect, and maybe that's because products are really sweet anyway, and people aren't doing it anymore.
But I remember when I was younger, we used to I probably shouldn't say this, but we probably, we used to put sugar on our cereal, and now, I don't know what's necessarily caused that change. Perhaps it's some of the work that's going on in schools, for example. As you say, it'd be interesting to do more research around what's.
And I think that's a really simple message, isn't it? So you talk about white, like oval sugar in a bowl, in teaspoons, actively putting that on your food. And it's very easy to go, that's not so good.
Yeah.
I won't do that.
Yeah.
But when you're eating, blind processed foods that have sugar in them, you're going in blind a little bit.
Yeah.
So if you have to literally pile up teaspoons of sugar into everything you ate, in that way, then it would probably have more of an impact. Which is why, like you say, the work in schools is done where, you show children how much sugar is in that biscuit by showing them sugar cubes and things like that.
Yeah.
Because it brings it to life a little bit, and perhaps that's the reason they're not really knowing what's in food.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things often is this kind of, you get certain products that will say like, natural or 0% like marshmallow 0% fat on, etc. And then you presume there's like less sugar in there or they're healthier somehow.
Yeah,
And actually
yeah.
a lot of those products are that have the highest sugar content, a lot of products that are identified as being like high in protein, etc., kind of mask that by adding a lot of additional sugars.
That's definitely another area that needs to be looked at, because health claims and sort of claims on food,
Health claims,
although they are regulated, you can't just put any old claim on any old food. But there are kind of loopholes in that sense. You can put, fat free on, like you say, that kind of the sweet confectionery that obviously doesn't have any fat in it. It's like that, but it's that trigger, it's that nudge to be like, oh, that's a healthy product.
Absolutely. That's fantastic.
It is challenging for people trying to make healthier choices.
Holly, thank you so much for all your kind of insights so far. We're just going to be heading to a commercial break, so listeners, please do stay with us. After the break, we'll be talking more about honey, sweet tooth, is that a genuine thing, and everything to do with sugar. So please do stay with us, and we'll be right back after these short commercial breaks. Assalamu alaikum.
You're listening to an Inspire FM podcast, making available our popular programs from our daily broadcast on Inspire FM.
Any health advice given, whether general, diet, physical or spiritual, is general only and must be verified by your doctor. If you need medical advice, please consult a doctor.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the latest edition of the Health and Fitness Show. I'm your host Suleiman Rafiq. Nearly forgot my name there. Suleiman Rafiq, and today's show is all about sugar and sugar addiction. This show has been pre-recorded, so you can sit back, relax and enjoy the latest educating edition of the Health and Fitness Show. As we've been discussing in the first half of today's show, recent research has shown that on average we are having double the recommended levels of sugar, and record numbers of children are having teeth removed due to tooth decay, and we know that this is a particular issue in Luton. Some say sugar is evil, some say it's necessary for energy, and so what today's show is all around is separating facts from fiction. And I'm delighted to say that Holly from Action on Sugar is still with us. Holly, thank you for staying with us. Just want to take it forward now. Now, I know something that we have a lot of, particularly in the South Asian community, is honey. And so are you going to be the bearer of bad news? Or I mean, jokes aside, honey is something that, I mean, lots of people have honey, particularly for hay fever and this kind of stuff, etc. Can you just break down the truth and the myths around honey?
So as you say, there is a little bit of a health halo around honey. It's been used in kind of medicinal sort of purposes for many years. Ultimately, from a dietary point of view, it's sugar. It's the same kind of effect on the body as other sugars and syrups, and it does count as a free sugar, those ones that we need to limit. So yeah, maybe it's bad news, but there is evidence around things like there was a lot being covered about this hay fever thing recently, which I've seen, which is quite interesting. You have honey from local bees or things like that, and then there is some evidence to say that honey, have honey and lemon when you have a cold and it soothes the throat, and those kind of things. There are some evidence around. With regards to eating it as a food and as a sweetener, it has no other benefits other than sweetener. I mean, it does have a different taste, and more so than normal sugar. So that means that maybe you're consuming a little bit less of it because it's got a nice taste to it. Then perhaps that can be a benefit in regards to having a bit less.
I find the opposite.
Oh, really?
So this tastes nice. I'll have more. But I mean, just in relation to honey, because the other thing is often you get in the kind of spread section where you've got your jams and all the rest of it. You get products that are labelled as honey but aren't actually predominantly natural honey. Can you just talk us through that a little bit in relation to spreads as well, like chocolate spreads and stuff like that? They all come under free
Yeah.
sugars.
Yes. There are lots of different sort of spreads and variations. As far as I understand, honey, if it's a jar of honey, it's got honey written on it, it's got to be honey. But there are other products that when honey is added to something as an ingredient, like you say, in other spreads and things like that, it can really shout about the fact that it's got, honey spread or honey ingredient, something which makes people perhaps think that because of the health halo around honey,
Yes.
but it can have like 0.5% honey or 1% honey in it, and still, that's another thing we go back about talking about health claims and things, comments on pack that can perhaps mislead us a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's often used as an ingredient in that way to kind of make it sound like it's a healthier product.
Yeah, absolutely. And because it just the way it is with all the bees and everything like that, you just think, that's quite natural. You kind of think of it as kind of like a sugar cane or something like that. But it's kind of under free sugars. It's very much under that banner.
Yeah, but I mean, sugar from sugarcane is still free sugars as well. So it's all.
Sorry,
it's
say
all,
that again.
All sugar from sugarcane is free sugars. That's
free
how
sugars.
You make, so that's how you make table sugar. All sugar comes from natural sources of some, whether it be coconut sugar, honey from bees, table sugar made from sugarcane, sugar beet, molasses, maple syrup from trees. It's all natural. It's just because it's sort of been extracted from those things, it means that it has a particular effect on the body, and especially around your teeth.
Absolutely. Because I think another concern we have locally is around the levels of diabetes as well, and obviously there's a strong correlation there. Before kind of moving on, I just want to tackle the concept of sugar addiction head on. So is sugar addiction a genuine addiction? Is it a lot of people say I have a sweet tooth?
I don't think the evidence is quite there to say that it's as addictive as other, things that we see as being addictive.
Because it was like a rumor, like it's addictive as cocaine and stuff like this.
Yeah,
that said.
I don't think the evidence is quite there with that one. I mean, but that being said, it is difficult for people to cut down. Like you said, people will have this sweet tooth. But if you eat a lot of sugar, you're used to that sweet taste. It can be a little bit challenging to reduce it, but you will adapt quite quickly to that if you start to reduce it down. So addiction, perhaps a strong word, but you can certainly the more you eat, the more likely you are to consume more. So cutting down can really benefit you in the long term.
Sure. And then just kind of, because I'm convinced I've got a sweet tooth. I'm convinced of it, and that's what I'm always going to blame for that. But there was research that I saw that suggested that babies are more predisposed to sugar if their mums had sugar like during pregnancy. And is that something you're aware of?
I've seen similar things to that you've seen. Perhaps that there is evidence to say that how the mother eats, and in that sense during pregnancy can have an effect on the baby. And but that's not to say that it can have a huge effect in how likely they are to have a sweet tooth. But there is some evidence there. But that's why it's important to always eat a healthy, balanced diet, especially when you're pregnant. But I think during the early years as well, that's why it's important, children are being weaned, to have really variety of foods, and not just the sweeter things that perhaps they'll go to. Because obviously, when they're breastfeeding or having formula milk, that's quite sweet. So it's probably, quite easy for babies when they're being weaned to be moving on to sort of sweet yogurts and bananas and things like that, because they're a lot sweeter. But it's important to go for like a wide variety. And it's important if you're having any kind of problems with weaning or any concerns around pregnancy or anything like that, because it's it's a really challenging time. Then just make sure that you communicate with your midwife and your GP and get the right advice. Because as you say, there's a lot of these types of stories in the press, and it can be really quite challenging for if you're pregnant, you don't want to be being told that you're that you're going to give your child a sugar addiction. That's kind of that when it's sometimes when it's report these kind of evidence research is in the press, it can sometimes be a little bit misleading and can worry people. So I just would encourage people just to speak to the right people. Don't ask Dr. Google anything. Go to your GP and speak to your if you're worried about anything like that.
Yeah, and I think similarly, there's good advice on the NHS website in relation to particularly around types, like practical examples of types of foods that you can give to babies. Particularly, like you say, breast milk is naturally very sweet, and so actually trying to create a broader range of foods that even at a very, very young age, children are having can have such a beneficial effect for them in the long run. Particularly, as I say, keep coming back to the concerns and issues that we have with tooth decay locally, and that actually in some examples starting extremely young. And so just encourage everyone to just check out NHS Choices in relation to some of the information that's available on there. Okay, I know there's been a lot of press about this one lately, and that is the sugar tax. And quite a famous politician has come out and said that there's possibly a review of the sugar tax, and suggested people just need to do a little bit more physical activity, and that would be all good. So why do we need a sugar tax?
There was a couple of interesting things that came out of that news story. Well, the sugar tax is actually a levy, and it was brought in last year. And basically what it means is that if for sugary drinks, so it's just sort of fizzy drinks and things like that, doesn't include juices or milkshakes, as we were talking about earlier, if the product contains more than 8 grams of sugar for 100 mils, then ultimately a levy will be applied on it for 24 pence per litre, which would need to be paid by the manufacturer. Or passed on to consumer. If it's a little bit less, 5 to 8 grams per 100 mils, it's 18p a litre. And if it was less than 5 grams, then there's no levy to be paid on it. So when this came into force, or before it came into force, it actually encouraged manufacturers to reformulate their products. So 50% of manufacturers have just reformulated all of their products to contain less than 5 grams, so avoided paying any levy on that, which has meant a massive drop in consumption of sugar if you think about how much is being drunk. And those manufacturers that chose not to reformulate and kept the sugar levels the same have chosen to pass that cost on to the consumer, which is why the more sugary drinks are slightly more expensive. And this was a choice made by them. And this money is supposed to be being used to help schools with physical activity and things like that. So it's really effective. It's made a huge difference, and we actually want to see it extended into these milk-based drinks, which is what we were talking about before, that have kind of because of a slight loophole, they've kind of got away with it a little bit. But it's made huge reductions. It's had huge reductions in other countries as well. So it's really something that needs to be maintained and extended to other food groups.
Okay, so so contrary to reducing it, you're advocating that it's extended to other drinks as well.
Yeah. So definitely with milk-based drinks, and there's definitely potential to think about using this type of system with other products, such as chocolate confectionery, where it's a kind of a nudge for manufacturers to reduce the sugar or fat in the foods, and it's a lot more straightforward than some of the other voluntary measures, which aren't quite as effective.
Because there was lots about, my Mars bars are getting smaller and, et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to be that people are just getting used to that now, and it's just something that...
Yeah, I think the Mars bar getting smaller thing is, so we have a sugar reduction program in the UK.
Right.
Which is a voluntary program, and government challenged industry to reduce sugar in products that contribute the most sugar to children's diets by 20% by 2020. And this is foods that are typically to sugar, so it's chocolate, sweet, cake.
So this is a voluntary agreement.
It's a voluntary scheme, yes. So in the first year, they were supposed to have reduced by 5%, which very which is it's an example of why some of these mandatory measures, such as the sugar levy, make huge differences in the nutritional makeup of sugary drinks, whereas the voluntary ones, it's a little bit slow, it's not quite as effective. So we can see that some of these things, but the portion size getting smaller was another lever for them to increase the sugar content. So it's decreasing the portion size, changing the product so it has less sugar in it, or shifting the sales to healthier products. So actively encouraging consumers to have the kind of lower sugar version.
Sure. Okay. Just coming back to kind of practical for our listeners in relation to another, I don't know if it's a myth or a fact, is this concept of having sugar highs and sugar lows. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
If you eat a lot of sugar, or you have something that's really, really sweet, like a sugary drink, or a really sugary milkshake or cake or whatever, then you're likely to have a quite spike in blood sugar, which is going to give you lots of energy. You're likely to go, have a lot of energy for a little while, but this energy is not sustained, so it tends to dip shortly after, which can make you feel quite low in energy, can make you want to reach for another sugary drink or energy drink, which is why it's not great. We talked earlier about these kind of consistent energy levels being really important. So in that respect, you're more likely to get less highs and lows if you're eating more fresh fruit and vegetables, whole grains, fibre, things that keep you fuller for longer without these kind of spikes in blood sugar throughout the day. And that's generally what we mean by saying highs and lows of eating sugar.
Sure. And just in relation to sugar and its impact on diabetes, how can you just explain a little bit about how that works, how having too much sugar might then result in diabetes, for example?
It's quite complicated, so I'm certainly not a diabetes expert, so I'm not going to go into it too much because I think it can be a little bit unhelpful. But there's no amount of sugar that's going to give you diabetes, specifically type 1 diabetes, which has nothing to do with that. If you're eating too much sugar and you become overweight because of eating too much sugar and eating lots of other things as well, then that can cause you to develop type 2 diabetes. And also there's a link between drinking too many sugary drinks and developing type 2 diabetes. But when you have it, it's about eating a healthy, balanced diet and being managed by your GP and making sure you're taking the right advice. But it's not so much that eating too much sugar you'll get diabetes, or if you have diabetes you can't have any sugar. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and I think it can be quite confusing. But it's generally the being overweight can cause, is more likely to cause you to develop diabetes.
Sure. And then just in relation to, I've heard a lot of people over like the last year or so saying I've cut out sugar completely, I'm sugar free. And is that something that you would kind of advocate for people just to try and completely cut out sugar if they can?
I think it would be very challenging to cut it out completely. It would be very difficult. There's no need to do that. We all like a little bit of sugar in our diet. It would mean never having chocolate, never having a piece of birthday cake, and there's no need to do that from a health point of view. It's just something we need to be mindful of. And it's something that we think that the food industry and the advertising industry should be a little bit more held accountable to some of the sugar that's in things. But it's not something that we need to think about cutting out completely. Although it's so difficult that if you probably try to cut it out completely, you probably just about manage to, meet the requirements, because just by accident with the things you're eating.
Yeah, absolutely. And just we've spoken a bit about reformulation, which is where the way the product is formulated is changed, and a lot of people commenting on the fact that chocolate bars, etc., are getting smaller. You mentioned earlier that the voluntary kind of agreement with industry wasn't as successful as perhaps hoped. What are you kind of advocating as the next kind of steps then for that?
I think, as we've spoken about, there's sort of other ways to kind of encourage more formulation in that in that area, so a little bit more accountability, so some mandatory measures in place. So with regards to reformulating a product, if we use salt as an example, the salt reduction program, which is a mandatory program, brought around huge reductions across the board and improve people's health across the UK because of that. And it's a lot easier for industry if everyone's on a completely level playing field. So because if you're a manufacturer that's trying really hard to be conscientious and reduce the sugar in your product, but there's other business, because it's not mandatory, the other businesses aren't doing it, then it's not really fair. So we just want to see it be just much simpler for everybody involved, including the manufacturers, to have more mandatory measures. So it's either by the use of levies or other levers to kind of enforce it a little bit more. So it's a little bit it's a little bit easier for them to get it done.
Sure. Now, lots of our listeners may be parents, and I know that it's often difficult because you see a lot of these kind of products that are it feels as though they're being targeted at children, and like cereals, for example, have various different kind of cartoon characters on them, etc. Are you as an organisation trying to do any work around that?
So we had some research that was recently released. We did some work with the Children's Food Campaign, and we looked at all products that are available to buy that have food and drink products that have cartoon characters and things that could appeal to children on the pack. And we found that we surveyed over about 500 products, and over half of them were products that were high in fat, salt, sugar. And this is something that we just think is just completely unacceptable. That you can have children wandering around the supermarket and seeing products with their favourite cartoon characters on that are, high sugar, high fat, foods that aren't so good for them, and puts a massive amount of pressure on parents to try and, to give their children a healthy diet when they're constantly being bombarded with this messaging. And as we spoke about earlier, a lot of these products will sometimes have high in fibre put on the front of them, that a parent might glance at quickly and think, okay, fine, it's got your favourite cartoon on it and it says it's high in fibre, so I'm sure it's fine, throw it in the basket. But it can be really, really high in sugar, and they're not advertising that fact on the front, in a big banner on the front of the packet. So it's very misleading. We just think that those kind of characters shouldn't be used on food.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's challenging, and often you see a lot of these unhealthy products when you're in supermarkets. They're often on special offers, and it feels as though they're kind of being you're kind of being constantly bombarded with buy one get one free offers on the unhealthy products, but you don't see so much of that in the fruit and vegetable section when you kind of go around there. So it feels as though there is a lot more that these companies could do to help us all really in relation to the kind of foods that we're having, but equally it's not all kind of despair. I think a lot of good work is happening within schools, and Public Health England campaigns. Change for Life, as you mentioned earlier, is a campaign that I know with summer holidays fast approaching is something that a lot of parents can kind of get on board with. And they've teamed up with Disney and some other organizations to provide some good kind of fun healthy recipes and physical activity opportunities, etc. as well. So listeners, please do kind of check that out as well in relation to the resources that are available from Public Health England. If you just search for them, you'll be able to find those. And equally, schools, there's a lot that Public Health England can provide in relation to resources for schools. So, if some of the information you've heard today has kind of given you food for thought, then, why not support your school in relation to lots of the resources that are available for children through Public Health England. Holly, just finally, I just want to come on to, as I say, today's been extremely informative, but at the same time it just feels it's a little bit like it's a tough kind of concept, and it's a tough battle to kind of keep your sugar within the levels that has been recommended. just so we don't leave our listeners feeling as though there is nothing that can be done, can you just suggest some practical swaps that people might want to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to have a look where you think your sugar is coming from and make some easy swaps. So, for instance, if you have sweetened yogurt, you can go for a natural yogurt and add fruit to it, or mix half and half. So you're kind of diluting a little bit. Diluting juices with water. If you're having a cereal, kind of have a look for a lower sugar version and try and cut down that way. Or kind of, if you're a bit scared about changing completely, then maybe mix it up, half and half at first. And just making little changes over time will make a big difference.
Fantastic, that's great. Ollie, I'd just like to say on behalf of Inspire FM, really appreciate you giving us so much of your time today. It's been really insightful. It's great to have an expert that's been able to separate fact from fiction in relation to sugar, and just thank you and your colleagues for all the work that you're doing on this topic nationally as well. Just finally, for listeners, just a suggestion is another great thing that is available is another tool from Public Health England, and that's a food scanner. So anyone with a smartphone can download the food scanner app. I know it was recommended to me and I found it extremely useful, and it's just when you're not sure necessarily how much sugar or how much fat is in a product that you might be looking to buy, then that is something that can you literally scan the barcode and it will give you the facts around what is actually within that product. So again, we're fortunate these days to have a lot of technology, and some of these apps can be used to help us improve our health and fitness. So I'd just like to thank listeners. Apologies, today was pre-recorded, so there was no opportunities for text or WhatsApp messages, but you can always, if you do have any questions, you can always contact us on 0777 948 1822 and we can get those questions answered for you. And until the next time, I'd just like to thank you all for staying with us, and inshallah we will have a number of upcoming shows dealing with various different health and fitness related topics. If you do have any suggestions on topics that you would like us to cover, then again please do WhatsApp the studio on 0777 948 1822. Until next time, I'd just like to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Why not tune in to our live stream at inspirefm.org and follow and subscribe to our social media platforms at Inspire FM Luton.